like
well,
such
listen, you and I are going to have a totally different perspective on that than the people that are actually upset about the Jesus Christ
for sure,
Superstar
for sure.
musical.
We'll leave that aside. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to No Script, an unscripted conversation about theater's best scripts. I'm Jackson. I am here with Jacob today. I'm back from the brief hiatus, the special guest hiatus. Excited to have had the chance to have listened through those, but I'm excited to be back today and wrap up the season. This is the end of our season today, so it's an exciting day. Not to fear, we'll be back soon, but it's always exciting to kind of come to the end of a season and mark that sort of moment in the life of the podcast.
Yep, the end of another season is upon us. Crazy to think. It always feels like the seasons go a lot faster than we thought. Also, love to have guests. Great to have guests. Glad to have those really cool, alternate perspectives on scripts. But then it's always fun to come back to home base, as it were. Today we are discussing, a huge. I don't know that it's possible to describe like the size of the thing that we're talking about today. The absolute what word am I looking for? Just the enormity that is Jesus Christ Superstar by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice.
Yes, excited to have the chance to talk about it today. It's just such it's got so much life, so many different adaptations of Jesus Christ Superstar, so many different ways to experience it. It's become sort of this cultural piece of theater and so much a vibrant part. So many people even understand the narrative of Holy Week with that as part of it's influencing how we experience that narrative as well. So it's a impactful musical. Cool to finally have the chance to return to it, or to have the chance to return to it on the show.
Yeah, and we've talked about Phantom of the Opera before, which is another Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, and so the thing about Phantom of the Opera is that its musical style is not even close to the same as Jesus Christ Superstar is, right? And that's I suppose the musical folks out there could maybe find the Andrew Lloyd Webber sort of identity that exists behind it, but to my ear, my sort of non-musical ear, Jesus Christ Superstar and Phantom of the Opera are like spectrum ends, and that is, I don't know, that's just it's really fun to me to look at these composers who are doing stuff that are massive swings in terms of style, and I just to me the Phantom of the Opera and Jesus Christ Superstar are so different, and that's just a blast. I would imagine that it's a blast to work on Andrew Lloyd Webber's part.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely having Tim Rice in the equation for this one, you can hear some of the Tim Rice in there, and it certainly makes it a kind of a vibrant a way to engage it. But yeah, it'll be really different, I think, for us in the conversation, kind of having had Phantom of the Opera on the show before. That's kind of the main way that we've talked about Andrew Lloyd Webber on the show. This will be a really different musical to talk about, I think.
Yeah, well, and it's also it's a familiar story, right? I mean, as like you said, Jesus Christ Superstar is essentially the Holy Week. It's described as the 7 days leading up to the death of Jesus, and so this musical is working with a much more familiar existing story than Phantom of the Opera was working with. And that is, I mean, I would imagine without knowing ahead of time, this is unscripted, but without knowing ahead of time, that probably some of our story will talk about, or our conversation today rather, will talk about how Webber and Tim Rice dealt with the enormity of the story, right? The worldwide phenomena of the story itself, and how they brought that, what sort of unique ways that they staged that.
Yeah, for sure. This, I mean, it's such a the kind of core story is such a well-known story to the point that like when we get to our summary, we might have a very short summary today. Of like because it's such a well-known story, but the ways that this play kind of like focus our lens into that story and then also use anachronism and kind of cultural moment to view that story and really kind of focus on the people themselves is really fascinating. So excited to have the chance to talk about it today.
Yeah, fascinating and controversial, as we'll talk about in the context.
Yeah.
Right? Jesus Christ Superstar is quite the hot button issue. Really, weirdly, even today to some degree.
Ongoing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, we got a lot to talk about. It sounds like should be a fun episode. Before we get to any of that, we do want to invite you to head on over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/noscriptpodcast, all one word, no hyphens, no underscores. That is where you can become a supporter of the show. This podcast, again, we're at the end of a season now, and the fact that we were able to get to the end of a season is thanks in large part to our supporters on Patreon who make doing this financially feasible for us. We love it, but it's not free to do, and it just wouldn't be possible, especially in the way that we do it, without the support of people on Patreon. If that's not you yet, please consider it. Head on over to patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. You can see the different tiers, the different support levels. $1 a month is our lowest tier, $12 over the course of the year, and even that level is just so helpful to us. Couldn't be more thankful for the folks over on Patreon.
Yes. Thank you all so much for being patrons of the show throughout this whole season. Y'all are awesome. Y'all rocketh to bring back the rocketh, especially today with the rock opera.
Especially prominent today to say rocketh.
For sure. Thank you all. You all are awesome. We'll see you on patreon.com/noscriptpodcast.
And now back to the script.
Here we go.
So we've talked about Andrew Lloyd Webber before, so we'll set that aside. And I'll just provide the briefest of introductions to Tim Rice, because I think there's going to be quite a bit to say about the context and sort of legacy of Jesus Christ Superstar. Tim Rice, really best known for his work with Andrew Lloyd Webber. So, I mean, Jesus Christ Superstar, yes, okay, that is the probably the best known one, maybe, although I'm about to say a lot of titles that you're all going to know as well. So these are, their collaborations are things like Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, interesting comparisons to Jesus Christ Superstar there. It's Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. I think some people like Joseph better than Jesus Christ Superstar. That is not my opinion. I like Jesus Christ Superstar quite a bit better than Joseph, but, they're interesting comparative projects, I would say. They also worked together on Evita, and that little trio of plays, and I shouldn't say little, I guess, but that major trio of musicals, Joseph, Jesus Christ Superstar, and Evita. I mean, those are three of the most influential musicals you could imagine for the last 50 years or so, is by this collaboration. But Tim Rice goes on to do all kinds of other great stuff. I encourage you to check out a list. We only want to do kind of a short thing here, but these are projects like the musical Aida. Many of you might know that he co-wrote with Elton John. He wrote for Disney's Aladdin with Alan Menken. Alan Menken, of course, famous for Little Shop of Horrors and others, and also wrote for The Lion King. I mean, just a crazy list of projects that this guy is on. You'll know his name best from those trio of plays with Andrew Lloyd Webber, but as you look into the career of Tim Rice, you'll see that he's credited and involved with a ton of projects that that you are very familiar with, and the legacy of his work is just so stellar and so wide and prominent. Also cool, he was knighted in 1994 for what they call his services to music. So well done, Sir Tim Rice, on that. So just the briefest of introductions there. Jesus Christ Superstar started as this collaboration between Webber and Tim Rice, and it started as a concept album, which they released because, so the story goes, they could not get funding. In July of 1971, they did a production of the show for sort of the first time in Pittsburgh at the Civic Arena, and that was huge. I mean, it just blew up to such a degree that they had all of these unauthorized productions all over the country of Jesus Christ Superstar, in part because of the album that they had released and this crazy, performance in Pittsburgh to like 13,000 people. And so they were trying to like shut down all these productions because they were trying to figure, what was going to be next for this musical. And in 1971, it opens on Broadway, directed by Tom Horrigan at the Mark Hellinger Theater. It ran for 711 performances. It ran until 1973, received 5 Tony nominations. Weber himself got a Drama Desk, and this is sort of funny, Drama Desk Award as the most promising young composer or something to that degree, which is hilarious to think that at any point in Weber's career, he was like an underdog. He's like, oh, this promising young fellow will get there someday. It's like now he's, up there with Sondheim and everybody, as certainly not like, I don't think promising is the right word anymore. Once Jesus Christ Superstar got on Broadway, and because of the major album and the performances all over the country, it started to get into the public zeitgeist. And this is where you start to see the controversy emerge. Religious communities all over the world protest Jesus Christ Superstar. They write articles, they get on news shows, they get on radio shows, and so the objection is to the portrayal of the story of Jesus Christ for a number of reasons. Similarly to Godspell, Jesus Christ Superstar doesn't stage a resurrection at the end of the story necessarily. So there's objections to that. There's objections to the way that Judas is made into a more sympathetic figure. And then Jesus Christ Superstar specifically, there is a fair amount of objections to the way that Jesus is sort of staged as maybe just a human. And that maybe, I think, is a question. I think Jesus Christ Superstar is more complicated in its portrayal of Jesus than perhaps some of the folks that are upset about it do. But that is where the controversy arises. There's also a fair amount of controversy from Jewish communities about its presentation of the sort of Jewish elite as the bad guys in the story. But it becomes controversial. And the controversy then becomes part of the story itself, right? There's like, the old no such thing as bad press. That's part of what blows it up. In 1971, there are 2 tours launched simultaneously in North America, and then 1976, another national tour that ran for 4 years until 1980. Jesus Christ Superstar opened at the Palace Theatre in London in 1972, and it ran there for 8 years, holding the record for the longest running West End musical eventually. And I gotta say, just heartbreakingly for me, it gets beaten out by Cats. And that is just... you just can't stand to see it. Listen, Cats is not my favorite thing in the world. I'll just say that now. And the idea that it becomes, I don't know, that's a pain one. That's a hard one for me. 72, it is at the Scandinavium in Sweden, which is a huge arena. And that will start this sort of alternate way of performing Jesus Christ Superstar. So there is like staging it as a traditional musical, and then there is performing it more as an enormous rock concert in rock concert venues. And you'll see both those things sort of happen over the life of the musical. At 72, it's also at the Adelaide Festival of the Arts in Australia, which leads to a full production at the Capitol and Palais Theatre that runs until 1974. It's also in Yugoslavia in 72. In 1973, a film version directed by Norman Jewison with Ted Neely as Jesus. That's a very famous one. Ted Neely will then come back in a couple of these live productions as Jesus. That film, received a bunch of Golden Globe nominations. Still very famous. It was also in France and Ireland in 73, and in 74 it's in Mexico, Peru, and Singapore. In 1977, there is a Broadway revival that runs from 77 to 78. By 1980, so now we are, almost 10 years into the life of Jesus Christ Superstar, the musical has just, as you've sort of heard, gone bananas. It's grossed more than $230 million worldwide. In 1992, there's a North American touring revival revival that includes some of the folks that are in the 73 film. It's supposed to be just a short little tour. I don't know that these famous performers from the film were really sort of in on the idea of years and years, but it's crazy. It's so popular. It runs for 5 years. It tours the country. In 92, Australia, in 94, in New Zealand, also in 94, and this is weird. I've never heard of this one before. I had to look up more information about it. There is this concert performance of it that is, I mean, it's not like, this is where it gets weird too, because we talk about like concert versions of musicals, and that's not what I mean by this. I mean, they stage Jesus Christ Superstar as if it is a rock concert, which works for the musical. So not quite the same thing as like a concert production of a musical. So they stage Jesus Christ Superstar as if it is a rock concert in Atlanta, Austin, Seattle with the Indigo Girls. One of the Indigo Girls plays Jesus and the other one plays Mary. I mean, that's awesome. I can't imagine that did much to quell the controversy, let's say. But it's super cool. I read a couple of things about that production just because I was so fascinated. 1996, there's a London revival that's followed subsequently by a UK tour. That tour subsequently transfers to Broadway and is nominated for a Tony. In 2000, it filmed in 99, released in 2000, 2001. There's another film version with Glenn Carter as Jesus, directed by Gail Edwards and Nick Morris. That gets transferred over to PBS, great performances. 2004, national tour of the UK. 2006, national tour of the US that plays for another 5 years. We're skipping around a little bit. 2011, there's a performance at the Stratford Shakespeare Festival in Ontario. That production is transferred to La Jolla. That production then is transferred to Broadway in 2012. I mean, how many Broadway's revivals are we at this point? This thing just keeps coming back. 2012, there is, I mean, and this is wild. And this is another one I'd never heard of. In the UK, there is a competition TV show that is produced by Andrew Lloyd Webber, where there's all these sequences of competitions, and then the UK audience votes, and the UK audience chose Ben Forrester to play Jesus in this huge arena performance that is very much like the largest of rock concerts that comes out of this competition. And again, Andrew Lloyd Webber produced it. This is not like some side weird thing. This is the guy coming up. I mean, it's just crazy. So cool. 2016, at Regent's Park in London, the Open Air Theatre, that production won a Laurence Olivier Award for Best Musical Revival. That production then transferred to the Lyric Opera of Chicago and then back to London. There was a U.S. tour planned of that production. Unfortunately, the pandemic shut it down, but they brought it back in 2021. So that's a performance history. I think a lot of people are going to be, like this is not the most recent performance by any means, but the one that I think a lot of people are going to be very familiar with. In 2018, NBC did what they called a live concert version. I don't know if you saw it, Jackson. I would there's 0% chance I would call that a concert version. Would you?
Yeah, I mean, a pretty high production version of a concert version.
It was a full production. There's a set. There's costumes. They do all the blocking. I like it. Wild to me that they would call that a concert version. I mean, that is a full high dollar production of Jesus Christ Superstar. That's filmed, played on TV. You can now watch it captured back. I watched it again in anticipation of recording this, and it's just great. John Legend as Jesus, Sarah Bareilles as Mary Magdalene, Brandon Victor Dixon as Judas, Alice Cooper as King Herod. Interestingly, I had thought when I saw it that Alice Cooper brought in special guest to play King Herod. Okay, great. But that was like one-off kind of a thing. And I'm sorry that I did not write down where, but he had played King Herod before. That was news to me. Apparently Alice Cooper plays King Herod with some regularity. Cool. Yeah. I don't know. That's just fun. It's great. You can find it online to watch if you've never watched it before. It's I think it is a tremendously good production.
So we are going to jump into just a short, very short summary of this play today. As I've already mentioned, these are two, this play is so well known and this story is so well known. It's so interesting to try to summarize. So we're going to jump into
you could almost just say look up the 7 days or the whatever they say of the Jesus story. There are, it's weird because the musical doesn't quite change the story, like the plot points per se. I mean, it does a little bit in the way that any adaptation finagles with it, but what it really does is change the interpretation of the story quite a bit.
Yeah, you get some interior monologues that really sort of influence your exposure to the story.
And of course, a dead Judas singing like a rock song at the end. I mean, what could be better than that?
Absolutely.
For the people out there that aren't familiar with Jesus Christ Superstar, that's got to have been a shocking sentence to hear.
What?
A dead Judas singing a rock song at the end. But that is literally what happens.
It is. Absolutely. Okay, so just real quick, I'll do just a short summary, and then we'll jump into all that we love about this awesome play. So this story is concerned with Holy Week, the last week that Jesus is alive on earth, and the kind of walk up to the cross of Jesus and Jesus's disciples. We focus a lot on really three characters that I'm going to talk a lot about. There's lots of other great characters in this play, but there's Jesus, there's Judas, and then there's Mary Magdalene. These are the three that get a lot of the songs, a lot of the numbers, and a lot of the interior monologues that we engage with. So the play starts, I'm not going to go into the individual beats, but I'll talk about some of the moments that we get these interior monologues. The play starts with Judas kind of singing this big song, Heaven on Their Minds. And the kind of core question he's asking is Jesus kind of drinking his own Kool-Aid, to borrow another tragic end to a group of religious folks? Is he...
It seems like to me that premise is running on like an often observed feature of the Gospels. And I don't know that I think it's quite true or not, but the observation is that Jesus never quite claimed his divinity, that it's the crowds and the people around him that did. Again, there's going to be a lot of opinions on that particular claim about the biblical story. But the point is that I think that is what this Judas perspective that really drives the musical is built on.
Yeah. Is Jesus kind of internalizing what the crowds are saying and changing his projection to those people, and is that going to damage the overall mission that Jesus and the disciples set out to do? Judas has a lot of questions about, like, Rome is coming for us, Rome is coming for the Jews, what are we going to do about this? And you're not helping, you're making it worse, Jesus. So what's the way forward for us? That's what a lot of what he's holding is. We then hit a scene with the disciples, and we meet Mary Magdalene and the rest of the disciples, and we meet Jesus. They're all what's the buzz is the big song that they're kind of wondering around, like, what's going to happen? What are we going to do? When will this start? Are you actually the Messiah? Will you actually save us from Rome? Save us from whatever? Insert the thing that they want saving from here. And we start to get some of the interior monologue of Jesus, which is this kind of like, I'm tired of this a little bit. Y'all are pushing so hard. You need to relax. You need to step back a little bit. And then we also get Mary kind of stepping into that, trying to provide some of that comfort, some of that ease, to Jesus.
That Mary-Jesus relationship is probably, weirdly, because I don't personally find it to be the most objectionable thing in terms of the interpretation of the biblical story, but I think it is the most controversial piece of Jesus Christ Superstar, is the strongly implied romance, sexual relationship, or just, even if some of that is implied, not said out loud. So even if you gave it the most conservative interpretation, Mary and Jesus are quite close in this musical, and that has become a major point of controversy again. Even though I think there are other claims, like theological claims, in this musical that I think are far more questionable. But that's the thing, man. That's our culture. Right. They're like, that's what we hate.
The most visible thing. Yeah, absolutely. Into that is thrown Judas, who kind of has his line. This is a line from the biblical narrative as well, when Mary is kind of taking care of him and anointing his feet with oil. He says, we could have sold that and given it to the poor. And he has a song that is very much along those lines of, like, we should be helping the poor. Why are we doing this? Why are you giving her all this attention? She doesn't match your message all that well anyway. And so you kind of get this triangle starting to develop. Judas also has a lot of, I think, some interpretations. Certainly he cares a lot about Jesus. He also has a great deal of love for Jesus. Later songs kind of talk about how much he wishes he could love him. He ends up singing a refrain of Mary Magdalene's as well. I don't know how to love him, much later on in the play. So this kind of triangle begins to develop.
Brilliant reversal.
Yeah.
And right. I mean, we talk a lot in the show about like how great writers use something early and then use the same thing again later, but in a different way with a prop. You might call that a transformation. In this case, I mean, to use that refrain, I don't know how to love him, as with Mary at first in that controversial way, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how to love him. That's the tenuousness. But then to have Judas sing it so much later in the music, I mean, it's heartbreaking. It really is.
Yeah. Especially given the choices he's made by that point in the musical. So then briefly, just so we can get to our conversation, the rest of Holy Week happens. We arrive in Jerusalem. Palm Sunday happens. Caiaphas is there. He's plotting to try to kill Jesus. Pilate is there talking about having a dream that he's going to see Jesus. We go to the temple. He turns over the tables. All of the big beats of Holy Week happen. And we kind of land, I'll push us along the narrative to Gethsemane, where there is this kind of big number around the disciples wanting to be apostles. And there's the big blow up where Jesus, this is the theological song probably that's a little bit more important theologically.
I know.
Jesus.
This song is so much more controversial than anything in the Jesus Mary Magdalene relationship to me. Yeah. And it's just a Mary thing. They're just like, he can't have had a romantic relationship, and I don't need to share an opinion on that one way or the other. It's just shocking to me,
right?
That
so
this is not the song that everybody's like, that is wrong.
Yeah, between the Last Supper and Gethsemane, there's a lot there to chew on. But two great songs though, big songs where Judas is finally revealed as the betrayer. Jesus like goes to him one more time, and he continues to kind of yell at Jesus for like, why are you on this track? Why are you on this track? I can't avoid not turning you in at this point because of the track that you've been on. Judas is offered the blood money in exchange for kind of betraying Jesus. And Jesus has this big number in Gethsemane, this kind of struggle with God, which is pretty a great way to like interior monologue what is a very short couple of lines in the biblical narrative about him wandering through Gethsemane and asking God.
But I think notably that the thing that is a change to the narrative or a change to the it gets weird here, but
yeah,
in other words, the thing that would be, and I think is controversial in terms of like Christian theology about the Gethsemane prayer scene, is that Jesus implies that he doesn't know why he's going to die. He clearly has some foreknowledge that he's going to be crucified. And the musical doesn't really make clear why he knows that. If the musical's perspective that he's just a human is true in that context, we're not totally sure how he knows he's going to be crucified, except that during the prayer scene, he clearly says, I know that this is going to happen. And if it's going to happen, please help me understand why it's going to happen. I want to actually see my God in order to die for you, essentially, which of course is not, that is not the same perspective on Jesus' life and death that traditional Christian theology would have.
For sure. Yep, absolutely. So the betrayal happens. He's turned in. We go through a kind of a quick version of the next, like, basically day where he goes before Caiaphas, and then he goes before Pilate. Pilate sends him to Herod. We meet Pilate and Herod, who are two really great
Herod
songs.
Is awesome.
Both of them have awesome songs. Between Herod sending him away and him returning to Pilate, we get the really the Judas's death song, which is just really impactful, a great number, and really kind of bears all of the sort of consequences of the actions and all of the wondering about like what is the purpose of this. Then we go back to Pilate. We get a sentencing, 39 lashes. We're counting all the way to 39. Great moment of theater right there.
It really is. I mean, you think when you get 5 or 6 in, you're like, surely we'll skip a few.
Right.
And then they don't. They count every lash. And I mean, the script doesn't really tell you how to stage it, and different productions, of course, do it in different ways. But there's really no avoiding that the audience sits there, and however you're going to stage it, Jesus is whipped 39 times, and they count every individual one. I mean, it's brutal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. It's and that whole scene then rolls into this big rock number, which with a now dead Judas having killed himself, now dead Judas shows up and sings Superstar, which is,
The song.
the song. We've had other, the Jesus Christ Superstar throughout the play, but this is the Superstar song.
He brings it home, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. We then get kind of a denouement almost. That's kind of, I mean, it'd be interesting to talk about what exactly is the like climax point of the play. But
It might be Judas' suicide. Honestly.
It might be.
There's not a lot of great other options, to be really honest with you.
Yeah. Yep. But we do kind of finish out the narrative. We do get the crucifixion. We do get Jesus dying. And we end before the resurrection. Now, a lot of different productions, certainly the movie sort of like hints just a little bit at it, though it wasn't necessarily planned to do so, which is kind of a cool bit of trivia. But a
lot of productions will imply that a resurrection might, leave some sort of image of possibility.
Yeah.
Yep. Here's what I don't understand about that. Maybe we just dive in here, Jackson.
Yeah, go for it.
So that is a common criticism from the Christian, folks about Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell, actually, is that, they don't stage the resurrection as part of the story. What I don't quite understand about that objection in Jesus Christ Superstar is that Jesus Christ Superstar clearly, unequivocally implies that there's life after death. Yeah. Judas comes back and sings a whole song. And I mean, typically the staging of Judas is as like a kind of a new made person. He's not in the same sorrowful rag, terribleness that he's in before. He often, in the NBC Live one, he comes back in this sparkly, essentially angel outfit.
Right, yeah.
Jesus Christ Superstar clearly, undeniably, is like, this guy was dead. There he is. He's still alive. So like the objection that like, oh, we stopped the story before Jesus' resurrection. That one is a little strange to me because this musical is as much about Judas as anything in my point of view. And Judas comes back to life. Judas gets the resurrection. Now, maybe it's not quite a bodily resurrection. He's probably more like some kind of spiritual heaven being, but whatever, right? Their life, like supernaturalness in that part of the story is part of it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it has that sort of like, he comes back and he's singing about why didn't you come when there was a time when there was TV, etc.
Oh, so I know. Let me just read that line because it's so good. I've got it marked too. I think it's so crucial to what this is, right? He says a refrain that he's sung a couple of times. Why you let the things you did get so out of hand? You'd have managed better if you'd had it planned. And then why'd you choose such a backward time and such a strange land? If you'd come today being, I guess, whenever the thing is being performed, so 2025, if you'd come today, you would have reached a whole nation. Israel in 4 BC had no mass communication.
Yeah. Yep. So he has this sort of like beyond time sort of perspective that he brings into it, still with questions. He's not kind of fully omniscient, but still with questions. And so I think there is this like established that there is something more out there and that Jesus is likely going to interact with it somehow. I think that the reason why there is the frustration that is there, it's like not my opinion, but I think the reason why is because this musical spends so much time with the question of whether Jesus is man or the Son of God.
Yes.
And I think it does such a good job with that. I think it's such a compelling question, and presented so well in this musical with all the interior monologues.
I don't think it clearly answers it.
Exactly.
The criticism of it is that the musical takes the perspective that Jesus is a human fully through, and I do not agree. I do not think that's the perspective of the musical.
No, I agree. In fact, it's all tied into the question of is Jesus a superstar or is he this something else, this other
It's
thing.
Like the first thing that is sung in the whole musical is there's a little bit of there's a fairly robust opening overture. That there's a lot of action that happens. As with most musicals, it's not very clear what happens during a lot of the music. That's kind of up to the production team. But the first real sung thing is Judas. My mind is clearer now, at last all too well. I can see where we all soon will be. If you strip away the myth from the man, you will see where we all soon will be. And it's that idea, like strip away the myth from the man, I think is another way to say that that's the question of the musical. What
Yeah.
is myth and what is real?
Mm-hmm. Which, like, is part of faith. Like, that's like
Well,
such
listen,
a
you and I are going to have a totally different perspective on that than the people that are actually upset about the Jesus Christ
for sure,
Superstar
for sure.
musical.
We'll leave that aside. But
I don't know that we're the right people to address that part of the controversy.
however, I think that's why the controversy exists, because there isn't a landing point at the end. There isn't a moment where it's like, there isn't the God's the
Right, because the
optional Godspell
resurrection would
ending.
answer that question.
Exactly. Yeah, it would
And I think
finish the
some people
story.
think that the lack of a resurrection is an answer to that question as
Right.
well. Even though I think it's clearly not, because the story just doesn't go that far.
Yeah.
It's not like the musical goes on and then clearly, says, and people stole the body, which is the common explanation for where Jesus' body would have went, right?
Mhm.
And that's why that people thought he was resurrected, because the Jewish folks who followed Christ stole the body in order to spread the rumor of Jesus.
Right.
Right. The musical doesn't stage that; it just stops at the moment of Jesus' death. So I don't think personally that is intended to answer the question of the musical one way or the other.
Yeah, it's supposed to leave it open to conversation.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, right? What this musical does, I think, is take Jesus and Judas and other characters. It does it with all the characters, but really, to me, that's the centerpiece of it.
Yeah.
Is Jesus and Judas, who are these figures that, and if we just think about it as a story for a second, I know we've got a lot of listeners that think about it as more than a story, but just as a story for a second, the story of Jesus and Judas. These are figures who it's like we've decided about them, right? The story that's told about them casts this, at least in our modern interpretations of it, we cast these really clear, almost like stock characters on them, right? The sort of the perfect and the ultimately always awful, evil, burn in hell sort of Judas. And the musical troubles the interpretation of both those characters.
Yeah.
Not in any like dogmatic way. I do not believe that this musical sets out to say, you idiots, Jesus was just a person.
Right.
But it does trouble that interpretation. And it really troubles the interpretation of Judas that we have as this like evil traitor.
Absolutely. Yeah, it complicates things. It kind of provides human perspective on both. And thus that complicates things.
And Judas has the beginning and end. And I this is maybe I'm maybe preaching to the choir, it sounds like, with you, Jackson, but like to me, the musical is more about Judas than Jesus. The story is about Jesus because the gospel story is about Jesus.
Right.
The musical is about Judas, his watching of this happening.
Yeah.
His involvement, of course. I don't, the musical does not absolve Judas of his involvement. In fact, he has what I think is a great song in the musical when he goes before the elders, and it's the I didn't give a thought to my own reward. I really didn't come here of my own accord. Right. So the sort of like, I'm not responsible for this, and the Jewish elders are just like, not having it.
Right. You got paid.
You are absolutely responsible for your actions, and you should be proud of your actions.
Right.
Is
You
their
saved
perspective.
us.
And Judas makes that accusation a couple of more times throughout the musical. When Jesus and Judas fight at the Last Supper scene, Jesus keeps saying, well, then go and do it. Go and betray me. And Judas says several times, you want me to do it.
Right.
You're begging me to do it because it's part of your story. And then in the Judas suicide scene, he essentially says of God, like, why did you cast me as the villain in this? Why did I have to play this part in your story? It's not what I wanted. So the Judas, the way that he tries to absolve himself is, I think, is seen through by the audience, or is intended to be, or is, again, I like this word, right? It's troubled.
Yeah.
It's like that. What you thought is we're just going to make the water a lot murkier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It makes you kind of second glance at it and like take another beat towards maybe some sympathy and maybe some empathy for Judas, because I think Judas has this role of being emblematic of at least some of the disciples. Later there's one number that the disciples sing between Pilate and Herod, where they're kind of also saying some Judas like lines of like, this is getting out of hand, someone's gonna die pretty soon, it's probably gonna be you, might be one of us, like what are we gonna do if that happens? And so Judas kind of takes that on, but Judas also in a way it takes on some of what we, looking at that story, also are asking of this question of like, what how are we gonna how on earth can we kind of continue in this path that you've laid out for us in the face of such pressure from empire and pressure from the Romans? So I think
And
that's
that's the questions that Judas asks within the context of the story. But I also think Judas, as our lens into the story, asks like the bigger questions, right? Like, are you a god or are you just a human?
yeah,
Were you somebody who is just swept away in this kind of revolution of the poor and oppressed? Or were you orchestrating the
right.
events that were happening, right? And those are like big questions of faith and interpretation that are being asked by, every Christian today in some form or fashion, right? And
Yeah.
so um, it is, I think it is a counter-cultural or I can't think of the word that I want right now, but a slightly like mischievous or
For sure.
thing to make the character that betrays Jesus, the villain of the whole thing, right? Ah, Judas, the villain. He's the one who's also like us,
Right.
right? Who's like, and should I believe in this or not?
Right. Well, and not only that, but if your interpretation of the superstar number is correct, he's in heaven as sort of an angel and sort of was made to do a lot of it and
Totally.
like comes back. So that's
Well,
counter
I
narrative
mean,
on Judas
listen,
too.
just not to get too theological for a second, but like, if you're a Calvinist, like you have to believe that Judas was made to do all that stuff. That's
Yeah.
like how the whole theological faith, like the idea that Judas was that path was laid out for Judas by God is not at all like a wild theological stance, even in like very traditional established Christian faith.
Right. It's a troubling one, but
A very troubling. But that's the thing, right? I think this story does like offer another perspective, which is like how troubling some of this story is,
yeah.
and how do you deal? Right? There's a lot of like theological questioning around the idea that like a parent god would ask their child god to be tortured, right? It's the idea of like divine child abuse, right? Like all that to say, like even within groups of people that take the story very seriously from a theological perspective, there are aspects of the story that are troubling. And what
Yeah.
this musical, I think, does is say the water is not as clear as you want it to be. The
Right.
water of this story, which is, to a lot of people, the most important story in the history of the world, is quite a bit cloudier than you would prefer it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And to add like another layer of cloudiness to that water, I think this musical is also sort of examining the moment that it's written in as well. In addition to the kind of narrative that it is examining with Jesus and Judas in the gospel, there's also this view into superstarism, into rock and roll, into the music industry, into fan culture, into all of these things that like 70s rock opera is being written into. This musical is highlighting what is this like almost fetishizing that we have for superstars and the following that we have for them, and how quick we turn on them in moments when they are suddenly kind of painted in a certain light. And so in addition to all that's going on from a religious sort of conversation world, there's also this really compelling examination of music industry, of theater industry, of fandoms and superstarism that is happening with these well-known characters.
No, you're totally right, and I think that is an important other way to understand the musical. Like one way to understand the musical is rock and roll and counterculturalism is used to further understand the biblical narrative in whatever direction you want to understand it. A different way to understand it is that this very familiar biblical narrative is used to understand the countercultural thing that was happening in the late 20th century. I mean, Jesus Christ Superstar, when it's performed and understood today, is a totally different experience than when it came out and how it was written, because of how the perspective of rock and roll as a music style has changed.
Yes.
And this sounds like maybe sort of a silly thing, but I think it's legitimately 100% true. Rock and roll now is like canon, right? Or it's like, it's a classic, right? Like there's classic rock stations now. We understand rock as part of the broader music and cultural industry, especially in America and the West, and Europe has quite a bit of, countercultural rock history too. We understand it now as establishment in a way that when this musical was coming out, rock and roll was this seedy, people didn't want their kids listening to it, right? And so when you take that kind of music and tell the biblical story with it, you're telling this sort of back and forth about two things at once. This totally, crowd riot, like the idea that rock and roll was going to get out of control was a very real cultural phenomenon. And so I think that's why this musical uses rock, is that it is used to tell the story of how this crowd in 0 BC, right? Or 0 AD, whatever it would be, right? Is like might get out of control. But I don't think it implies that anymore when we produce Jesus Christ. And that's a challenge for producing this musical, to try to get at what it's really trying to say.
Yeah. Well, that's super interesting to make that comparison, because I totally agree. When it comes out, rock and roll is the counter empire.
And it's like seen as bad.
Yeah.
Like by a lot of people, especially by the people that would have really valued the biblical story.
For sure, yeah. But like it's grasped onto by the hippie movement and by people who are looking for a way to sort of resist that era's version of empire, of kind of pressure from especially Western culture to assimilate.
Yeah, right.
And so for that, you grab onto the Jesus story, which at the time that the Jesus story happened was a very counter-empire, revolutionary sort of narrative that is welcoming a lot of people that people didn't think should be welcomed. You grab onto it. Really cool. Great expression in the 70s. Interestingly, now with rock having been established as this kind of like classic thing that a lot of people are on board with, it feeds into a lot of our music and is sort of this well-established thing. You have a different critique coming about as a result of this holding the two of them together, which is, maybe some of the fact that, the Christian movement has become a much more established thing. And is there like culpability in there? Is there like actual resonance with what Jesus was actually saying? So I think that critique is changed really interestingly now when you are bringing this production onto stage.
Well, and it also is a challenge for contemporary productions of Jesus Christ Superstar, because a lot of them, and NBC one did this to some degree too, produce it as sort of a period piece.
Yeah.
Where the costumes and aesthetic are of like late 20th century rock and roll. But that's what that ends up doing, is making the thing feel old, but not quite as old as the biblical story.
Right.
when Jesus Christ Superstar was coming out, it was designed to feel very much of the now. And so then you end up with this, like, which direction do you think the musical is trying to go?
Right.
And I think that matters in how you're going to stage it now. Because the one direction would be the way that rock and roll is countercultural and against empire and sort of part of the seedier, in terms of the dominant culture, elements of society, that aesthetic or vibe is layered onto the biblical story as a way to say, this is what was true of the biblical story. And you've made it establishment and pure and clean, but really it's more like rock. Or is it trying to do the other thing? And is it trying to say, listen, you've all rejected this countercultural musical worldwide revolution, but it's just as legitimate as the biblical story is. And which thing you more think Jesus Christ Superstar is trying to get at is going to determine what you're going to do to try to stage it today, because we just do not have the same relationship with rock and roll. And so if you think it's trying to comment on rock and roll through the biblical story, then you're going to have to find a different way to accomplish that.
Yeah, for sure. And which way, like I think that's what makes it so exciting to go see, because it is just good rock and roll. It is really good music. It's really good.
It's great music.
It's a great music. Rock opera is really cool. Like Nothing Spoken is very like a very cool thing to go see. But then also whatever piece of it or whatever thread of it you get to pull on based on the production team's choices really make it a different experience often.
This musical has such a wide ability for different kinds of productions.
Yeah.
I mean, it's similar, I guess, to Godspell is a comparable in that way. But like going to see Jesus Christ Superstar, I think you're going to know what you're walking into musically, but I don't think you will know until you see it what you're walking into aesthetically or like thematically.
Right.
Because the musical has this sort of different channels for what, not just like its interpretation of the biblical story, but what you think it's trying to do through this metaphor of superstar and rock and roll culture. And that how you do, I mean, it could be a really wide spectrum of what this is going to be. I mean, Jesus Christ Superstar has been produced legitimately in churches. And so you could see one particular avenue for interpretation there. It's also been produced at like seedy rock bars. Yeah. Where it's just rock and roll people doing it. I mean, so there's a huge variety. And so you really don't know what you're going to get from this musical.
There's so many different like pieces of this musical that we could like zero in on, especially our experiences of like seeing it in all its various forms. Fortunately, this is like such a well-produced production, but accessible play, because of the movie is very available, especially the 1970 version. There's a lot of different versions to see. If you're listening to it, you're experiencing the entirety of the show, which is unique to rock opera. Not obviously the blocking and the awesome spectacle, etc.
Well, but that I know that we're wrapping up here, but that's an interesting point, right? Because the music for this actually doesn't tell the story in the same way that some other fully sung through musicals, like if you just listen to it, you'll get, I just think that because this musical to me is almost more about the aesthetic and interpretation choices, because the music and the story are making some comparison to the biblical story and rock and roll countercultural culture, right? But then where that lands is not really based in the music and because the story just is the story. And so it's more about how the world is imagined. And so I think that you could listen to any cast album of Jesus Christ Superstar and get some awesome music and have no idea what they were trying to get at.
The critique was talking about. It's
right?
possible.
I think you could.
It's possible that, I mean, it's just so like imprinted on me, the like the story from seeing it. So it's very possible that like just a completely blind listen to it, you'd miss out on a lot of it for sure. But regardless, there's lots of ways to engage this play, lots of ways to interact with it, and we would love to keep chatting about this play with you. We know that amongst our audience, this is likely one of the ones that you have seen or been a part of or interacted with in some way.
Or
and we'd
like deeply hate.
Or deeply hate.
I think we got people out there who deeply hate it, and we love to hear from you too.
For sure. We'd love to chat about this play in whatever way you have experienced this play. You can find us on the socials at the username at NoScriptPodcast. We also have a Gmail, noscriptpodcast@gmail.com. Find us on any of those sites. We'd love to keep talking about Jesus Christ Superstar with you.
Alas, we are at the end of a season. We have arrived. Season 14 is now officially in the books. We will be taking our regular summer break, which tends to be our longer of the two breaks. We will be back in the fall with another great season. We'll give everybody a good heads up about what's coming. And of course, our patrons over on Patreon will get a sense of the first couple of episodes as soon as we have those. If it's not you yet, check us out, patreon.com/ facebook.com/NoScriptPodcast. Until we are back with season 15, thank you all for joining us for another great season. If you've enjoyed this season of conversations, please recommend us to your family, your friends, anybody you know that likes conversations about theater, but also more broadly, conversations about characters, writing, structure, themes, the phenomenology of how something's experienced. That's all the kind of nerd stuff that we do on this podcast. We love to do it. Come listen at, come check us out. Recommend us to the folks you know that would like that. We are on Apple Podcasts. We're on YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, Podbean, all those places. If you like our Facebook page, a link to the new episode appears every Monday when we publish. Not next Monday, though, because we're off for a while. We'll be back in the fall. Thanks for joining us for season 14. Until next season, I'm Jacob, here with Jackson. This has been No Script, the podcast.